writer and historian of dance. Wonderful to have you back for Dansox.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, this is Alastair Macaulay introducing the keynote lecture for this summer dance intensive. Is that the right phrase? This is really dedicated to one of the many absent people who are watching online, and his name is Thomas Page, because he's really the choreographer for this part of the summer intensive. And when Sue and I and he were in touch about this part of the summer intensive, he said that his theme word really was commonality. I have to say that's a word I normally never use, but I thought about it and thought, okay, let's take commonalities as a motif and then develop it also into communities and utopias. We're going to look at 7 different dances. I've really got remarkably little to say, but at least we can watch 7 pieces of, I think, great choreography. Most of it is on YouTube if you want to run back and check it, but I particularly like to thank the Merce Cunningham Trust and the Pam Tanowitz Company for letting me have special permission to show parts of works by those choreographers. And some of what I'm showing questions the idea of particularly utopias and certainly brings out different interpretations of commonalities. By commonality, I presume that Thomas Page and others assume common factors, things that dancers or people have in common, common denominators, but that itself can fly in different directions as we choose to interpret it. I'm also taking up, this is really by accident, taking up the idea that commonality can extend from one choreographer to another, and we're looking at the first pair of ballets are related, almost because Bournonville in Napoli, made in 1842, was really replying to Giselle, which had been made the year before. And then the 4th dance is Balanchine's Serenade. We're showing less than 2 minutes of that, but I'm particularly showing because normally people never say that Balanchine ever took from Nijinsky. Balanchine, on the whole, never admitted to taking anything from anybody except from Petipa, the great Russian or Franco-Russian god choreographer who inspired all of Balanchine's work. Actually, if you look at Balanchine, it is full of Nijinsky-isms, and we'll be looking at a few of those. The 2 great choreographers who took from Nijinsky, above all, were the dominant classical choreographers of the 20th century, namely Balanchine and Ashton. Ashton always admitted he took plenty from Nijinsky, reintroduced her work to the Royal Ballet when she had gone out of favour in the 1960s, and the Royal Ballet has more or less, not in the last 10 years, but until 2012, kept Nijinsky's work regularly in repertory. Okay, we're going to begin with Giselle. The version of Giselle we're looking at it's Act 2. It's Mirta, the Queen of the Willies, and her corps de ballet, and 2 lieutenant Willies, or Willies, depending on how you pronounce these spirits from the dead, these dance spirits. We're particularly looking at the wonderful Monica Mason, the patron of Dansox. This is filmed in 1979. If you want to look at it on YouTube, it's just billed as Rudolf Nureyev, complete Giselle. Nureyev is a couple of years past his real prime. Lynn Seymour is off form. She's really, her main career had stopped in 1978, and she's returning to dance this Giselle, and she's wonderful, Lynn Seymour, but not at her technically most precise. Still, the style as well as the drama, of course, are phenomenal. But Monica Mason as Mirta, Queen of the Willies, is the one we're looking at, and she is on top form. The interesting ambiguity about looking at the Grand Pas des Villiers, the French called it, the great dance of the Villiers, is that it seems at first to be utopia, it seems to be innocent, and very gradually we see how it darkens. The other thing about it is that the choreography is probably late 19th century here by Petipa, Russian. We're not sure how many steps he was taking from the French original. His brother, Lucien Petipa, had been the original Albrecht, so he probably was connecting it to the original. But he was a theme and variations choreographer quite often, and we're going to be seeing certain steps that reiterate and get developed. In particular, the arabesque. The first step we're going to see Monica Mason do is going from tendu back into arabesque, and then she'll do arabesque full turn, and then she stretches into penché arabesque. That introduces you to the idea of a woman's full-length line in arabesque, but that's just the beginning, because then she's going to show you the arabesque hop or arabesque voyagé on alternate legs, and then the arabesque jump, which she does with a change of accent or angle in mid-air, so it's technically a demi-fouetté sauté. Okay, let's watch. She has just risen implicitly from the grave, as she does every night. There's the arabesque. Such an exposing thing to do as your first step. So many mirtas wobble badly here. Not harmonica. And the long beginning to the scene seems almost bland. It's moonlit, peaceful. The music, as you see, as you hear, is sweet. It is not remotely evident that the Willies are creatures who, if a man enters their realm after midnight, they will dance him to death. Now the arabesque voyagé, the hop. Seems so innocent. If you look at Giselle carefully, and we're not going to look at the dances for Giselle and Albrecht, the arabesque voyagé, these hops return even for them. When Albrecht is at his most exhausted, Giselle suddenly jumps out of the wings into his arms, carries him across the stage, hopping in arabesque. And that's a very ambiguous step, because it partly looks as if she is taking the strain to save him. But actually the makers of Giselle intended intense dramatic ambiguity. It can be that she is trying to exhaust him further, the Willy side of Giselle. There's the arabesque sauté, demi-fouetté sauté. She changes weight from foot to foot, simple step, the pas de bourrée. That becomes another motif for the Willies. There aren't enough good films of Monica Mason apart from The Great Carabosse. But I think this one does show the extraordinary kind of classical beauty she had. I love the look of her face. Absolutely Grecian, still, without emotion. And she throws the flowers that will summon the Willies, her cohorts, for their nocturnal rites. In many productions they are not veiled, and I gather there's no evidence that they were veiled in the original, but I must say I love the look of it, especially in this production, because I think the look of moonlight is so beautiful. Total suspense, what is going to happen? Take your veils off, girls. Oh, not yet, I beg your pardon. And she summons her two lieutenants, Moyne and Zolme. And so you see, as in so many 19th century ballets, even after death, there is a hierarchy. The step they're doing here, this little beaten développé rond de jambe into little développé side, is another motif of the Villiers, and it is one that Giselle will inherit. Again, it's ambiguous. Whenever she does it, is she in fact just dancing in innocence, or is she a Villiers trying to lure Albrecht on further? Ballet, as you know, is generally thought of as an art of lightness, of the air. The interesting thing about the Villiers is that they are both of the air and of the ground. They do some of those arabesques, as you see, on flat foot, and the emphasis is done. I was interviewing Monica Mason. She is my favorite interviewee earlier this week, and she particularly adored dancing Mirta. It's a jumpy role, as you will see, and she adored jumping. She especially loved dancing it on the stage of the new Metropolitan Opera House in New York, because that was so much larger than what they were used to at Covent Garden, and you had to jump in a new way and eat up space. There's the pas de bourrée, changing weight from foot to foot. Solo for minor, beginning with the arabesque. And now she starts to widen the vocabulary. Beethoven made some ballets where his vocabulary is very wide on purpose, such as The Sleeping Beauty. There are other ones where he uses a deliberately restricted vocabulary. On the whole, Acteur Giselle has a restricted, insistent vocabulary. And that's part of the drama. Zollner's solo. Jump, jump, so the vocabulary is building and the music is beginning to darken. Here she comes jumping through arabesque lines, showing you the same stretch into the back leg, landing often in arabesque. And this kind of woodwind that we're hearing is very often the way that 19th century composers suggested qualities of diablerie, diabolic, infernal magic. Wonderful face, isn't it? On the jambe du développé again and again. Here we have the arabesque voyagé, now done as an ensemble. Building, the music is a real Rossini-type crescendo. And the emphasis is down. I particularly wanted to show you this film because the heads aren't looking ahead as we see in most modern Giselles. I believe this is how it used to be. They're looking down. The tempo is fast, which I love. The lines intermatch. this is when you really feel that something much darker is going on than you had hitherto realized. Sauté again and again with the parabouré. Underneath this classical exterior, these women are maniacs. And that, thank you very much, stop there. And that jump is something they will do again and again throughout this act as they try to dance Albrecht in particular to death. Now we're going to go to the ballet that Bournonville choreographed the very next year. He was in exile briefly from Copenhagen. He'd had a scandal, so he took leave of absence. Bournonville, the great Danish choreographer, August Bournonville, is in his late 30s. He's also the leading male dancer of the Royal Ballet of Denmark. And in this brief exile, he passes through Paris, which was the world's capital of ballet in those days. He looked at the rehearsals for the original Giselle, choreographed. The dances for Giselle and Albrecht were made by his old colleague Jules Perrault, but the corps de ballet was by Jean Coralie. Bournonville watched with great interest. He then went to Naples, which brought, of course, a kind of sunniness and spontaneity that was just, he felt, the essence of what he loved in Italy and what he really wanted, the positive atmosphere that he wanted in life and in ballet. But then on his way back, and this is often noticed, he went back through Paris and looked at Giselle again. And I think Napoli, though it's seldom said, is really a reply to Giselle. Giselle is an innocent story that becomes dark and tragic. Bournonville, on the whole, did not want tragedy. And so Napoli seems to get tragic. Gennaro, a fisherman, and his girlfriend Teresina get on a boat during a storm in the Bay of Naples. They get washed up in, guess where, the Blue Grotto in Capri. She is almost dead. She is almost transformed into a naiad, a creature of the spirit of the waves. He manages to produce a cross, Bournonville, full of Christian imagery, returns her to this world, to this life, comes back to Naples. Everybody now accepts this outsider, and we're going to begin just part of Act 3. Act 3 is one of the most joyous things in all of ballet, but we're going to begin with the classical pas de six, which has lots of guest variations. So a pas de six is, of course, a dance for six. By the end of it, we'll have seen about 11 people dance, actually, but begins with just the six. But before we start, we simply see the Fra Ambrosio uniting Teresina, who's on the left, and Gennaro, who's on the right. They are the wonderful Linda Hindberg and Arne Willemsen, whom I saw dance Napoli in Copenhagen in 1979. I think this is filmed in the early to mid-80s. You can see it on YouTube. Much larger vocabulary than we see in Giselle. But the pas de six gives us a different view of community. This bridge is one of the famous bits of scenery in all ballet because the children of the Royal Ballet School of Denmark, one of the first things they do is get to play the children on the bridge. And so Napoli, particularly Act 3, becomes part of Danish ballet life. There they all are. Some of them, you can see photographs where famous dancers like Peter Martins and Eric Broom have been on that bridge aged 11. These 6 people aren't part of the story. They're just here as friends to celebrate the nuptials of Teresina and Gennaro, and you see men and women dancing as equals in a way that so seldom happens in 19th century ballet. Same steps, same jumps. I love the way that the three on the left and the three on the right are going in opposite directions. So interesting to see steps back to front. Brief separation of men and women. But the interesting thing here is really they're doing the same thing. And look, the men here go into penché arabesque. I bet Bonneville didn't choreograph that. I bet that's a 20th century touch, but I happen to like it. All of these women are very leading members of the Royal Danish Ballet at this time. I saw most of them do leading roles. This is Heidi Riom, who went on to be a great teacher. We've already seen Mette Ida Kirk, whom I remember loving as the protagonist of Folk. This is the great Sophie of my lifetime, Liz Jeppesen. And that step simply going up into retiré balance is the kind of motif that we will see, another, shall we say, commonality. But on the whole, Bonneville isn't a theme and variations choreographer. Having had the entree, we now have this adagio, begun by the women. Simple walking out of fifth position, another fifth. Arabesque penché. As you see, the emphasis is on innocence and harmony. Quite a lot of the dances we're going to see are actually remarkably hard, but Bonneville doesn't make them look hard. Look, same-sex partnering. Who'd have thunk it in the 19th century? This actually was introduced as an idiom in the 1830s by Fanny Elssler, who rather disgusted Bonneville because when she first emerged in Paris, she didn't like to be partnered by a man. She always had her sister, Thérèse Elssler, partner her. But here, Bonneville uses it himself. Men du grand port de bras as a preparation for complicated pirouettes in attitude into développé. That's so hard to do, it doesn't look hard, does it? And in fact, that's just a preparation because they end just by opening their arms to support the women. More penché arabesque from the men. Love that touch, just looking under the arms at each other. And Bonneville's sense of community, so that everybody on three sides of the stage is part of this world, all participating. Here's the first of the guest variations. Most characteristic Bonneville jump, the jeté en attitude with the arms opening to the audience, welcoming the world. What I love in all of these solos, and we're going to see solos and trios in a long suite, is the extraordinary grammar that Bonneville will go from a difficult jump into a balance or something slow. You never quite know what's happening next. same little step that we saw the Willies do, but now blithe. Here's Liz Yepperson. Love that emphasis that after she's done the jump, she then just does a little smoothing gesture, which takes more time than the jump. And the emphasis really is anti-hierarchy. You've had a solo, now let's have a trio. One isn't better than the other. One of the other fascinating things about Bournonville is that whereas the French and the Russians tend to construct 19th century ballets so that the language of pure classical ballet was the climactic expression, implicitly superior to folk dance or acting. For Bournonville, they are all equal. This pas de six is one of the great events of classical dance choreography, but it's followed by a tarantella. It's a ballet tarantella, but nonetheless, it's really an Italian folk dance, which he had learnt while he was in the Bay of Naples. And then it goes on into a galop with everybody dancing together. Petipa could never have ordered a ballet that way. I'm always amazed how often you don't see the pirouettes coming in Bournonville. They're doing something simple with their feet and you don't realize it's a preparation to turn. He also loves jetés à la seconde, which is unusual in 19th century ballet, jumping sideways. Here's Gennaro, wonderful ambivalence, most beautiful legs I ever saw. Can't quite tell in these tights, but in Act 1 of Napoli, Gennaro dances in shorts. You know what Neapolitan fishermen are. I love these low arms, such a classic Bournonville characteristic. Solos just don't stop, and you cannot work out what kind of step is going to come next. Now Teresina has her dance. Little balances, but it's almost more that the point is having got the balance then falling out of it. Like a little joke. Fast feet, then slow into the balance. Again, the strange, brilliant sense of grammar he has. Just full of rhythmic surprise. Heidi Rion. And though the dance is mainly addressed front, they're aware that in passing it takes in all the other people on stage. Those sideways jumps, jetés à la seconde. This is Mette Ida Kirk. Love those inclinations of the torso. As I said, these 6 dances of the main Paradises aren't part of the story of Napoli. They're just there as part of the celebration. And Bonneville quite often choreographs like this. In the ballet by him that he was most proud of, A Folktale, the main classical dance in Act 3 is just done by 7 gypsies who come out of the blue and dance a fabulous pas de sept, incredibly virtuoso, and then vanish away. The leading 2 dancers have much more simple dances to do. It's always best seeing Napoli with the Danes because you see how everybody responds to each dance. It's their world. Still feel that the romantic ballet is young in Bonneville's choreography. There's no sustained point work, no long balances, no complicated pirouettes on point. And those are the only 2 real lifts that we see. Blessings on Bonneville. It always cleanses the palate like no other choreographer. Now let's jump to the 20th century. We're looking at Nijinsky now. As Dansox has already shown, I think a month ago, there's the recent publication of the first real full-length biography of Nijinsky by Len Garofoli, the American scholar. Extraordinary life, extremely difficult to research, and fascinatingly, in the light of this year's tragedies, Nijinsky came of age as a choreographer and as a movement theorist in, of all cities, Kiev in Ukraine. She had already danced for Diaghilev. She was a strong, brilliant dancer, but it's when politics, events take her Already, I think, with 2 children, and I think on her second husband, she finds herself in Kiev and then really works, particularly with other women, and works on a new emphasis in ballet, working on ideas that her brother, the great Václav Nijinsky, had already developed, but now she makes more her own, responding very much to the energy of the Bolshevik Revolution. She left Russia at end of 1920, beginning of 1921, joined Diaghilev, and then worked immediately for Diaghilev, made Les Noces in 1923. Les Noces is a ballet about community. You'll see very much another ballet about restricted vocabulary. But the point of this community is, I don't know if the word is tragic, but it is certainly pathetic. That is, it's a Russian commune. This is an arranged marriage. It's really a response to all of those 19th century ballets that end in happy weddings, happy marriage. Nijinsky, neither of whose marriages was great, though she stayed with particularly the second husband for 40 years. For her, marriage in Russia was an arranged thing. She wanted to show the pathos of it. She's responding to Stravinsky's music, but at the end, Stravinsky, in his words, and the words are by Stravinsky, we hear them in Russian here, suggests that marriage will be sweet as we see the bed at the end of Les Noces. Nijinsky is not suggesting marriage will be sweet. It's something of bleakness, it's been arranged, and the 2 most passive people in the whole of this amazing male-female ritual are the bride and the groom. Let's look. Oh, we've got photographs first. These are photographs from the Royal Ballet's original production. Here's Svetlana Beryosova. This is the most famous image in the whole of Les Noces, the pyramid of heads. The suggestion, as you'll see through the ballet, is that she's got to the top of the pile. It's her turn to be married. At the end, we will see the pile resume, but now it is the leading bridesmaid who is at the top of the pile. Her parents on either side. Next, please. The bridegroom with his mother. Amazing architectural shape for the men down towards the ground. Next, please. We're not going to see this in the choreography as we look at the 2 videos, but I wanted to particularly show this photograph. This is Robert Mead as the Royal Ballet's original bridegroom, because it's the other men, his friends, who are charging around him in these hurtling jumps that pounce down onto the ground. He simply stands, sadly, shall we say, resigned at the center of it. This maelstrom is going on around him. He just stands. Next, please. Beryosova, the bride, simply opens her arms to address everybody who has come, but it is they who are doing the dancing right down on the ground. And she, with her bridegroom and their 2 parents, just sit and stand at the back. Next, please. Amazing choreographic shapes we get here, and we'll see these danced in the video. Next, please. Look at this. There's Georgina Parkinson as the leading bridesmaid, and the couple, Beryosova and Mead, at the back. Next, please. Look at that. You never think that ballet is going to make men and women bend over like this. Next, please. Again, phenomenal geometries. Next, please. And that's the finale of the ballet, which we will see. Anthony Dowell is the bridegroom's leading friend, holding his hand at the end of the ballet. And Georgina Parkinson is now the bridesmaid at the top of the pile. And I think that's the last one, so let's go straight into the middle of scene 1. The bride here is Zenaida Yanovsky, also known as Mrs. Simon Kilisai. Same kind of wonderful sculptural face that Beryosova had. And the words are all about the bride's tresses, combing and plaiting the bride's hair. And here the plaits, as you see, are ritualistic, exaggerated length. everybody else who's doing the dancing. At no point in Lenos do we see ballet-type jumps with the legs stretched. The knees stay bent and the emphasis is on the arrival and the punks, and the ground. So they do bourrées, as we see in other ballets, but the legs are parallel rather than turned out. And the emphasis is not up into the air, but percussive, machine-like. Look at this way that the women on either side are taking arms on Quran shapes and tipping them. We're going to see that in Balanchine Serenade. Balanchine also used it in Apollo and other ballets too. You see what I mean here by the bride's pathos. And here's the pyramid. You could do quite a good PhD thesis on how many choreographers in the 20th and 21st century have copied that pyramid image. Some of them don't even realize that Nijinsky was the first one. Ashton's done it, he certainly knew. Kranko's done it. Recently, Justin Peck's done it, and I don't think he had seen Nijinsky's Lenos. Mansky has done it, he knows his history, and there are others. Kranko did it. Here's the bridegroom. The dancer is David Pickering, who interestingly is now the head of Royal Ballet Education. Amid the group you can see Edward Watson, who recently retired after a long career of over 25 years, creating dozens of leading roles. I can't prove it, but I suspect that Stravinsky wanted this score to be sung in the language of the audience. Certainly when I was first watching it at Covent Garden, we always had it in English. And the words aren't fancy poetry, they're real folk material that Stravinsky had devised himself. Another of these architectural groupings that we see gradually accumulating. T.S. Eliot writes in one of his essays, I think in the 1920s, that one of the possibilities for new... Oh, look at this amazing pile-up of backbends. We're going to see this again. But only Nijinsky up to this point could have conceived such a shape. Okay, we'll now move on to the end of scene 3. I'll finish my point about T.S. Eliot later. This is the bride leaving her parents. Again, everybody else is doing the dancing for her. Look, tragic gesture, and then she falls to the ground. Her mother is left alone. and in English the words simply were the mother simply going, "Ah, my love, my dear," grief-stricken parent. These Russian hands that are almost like fists are something that had already occurred in other diaglyph choreography, in particular in Fokin's The Firebird, where quite often you see them held by the face, with the head tilting. What I was saying about T.S. Eliot is that he began to write in the 1920s about poetry perhaps developing the quality of the new machine rhythms of the modern age. And I think Lenos is Stravinsky's idea of society as a machine, and that Nijinsky absolutely visualizes that. And the bridal couple are the cogs at the middle of it. They're just part of this machinery. So fascinating that Nijinsky wanted no facial expressions. That really becomes the whole style of a modernist choreography in both ballet and modern dance. Balanchine, of course, wanted no acting in most of his ballets. But it has an special quality in Lenos. It heightens the sense of helplessness. But they're facing upstage that way, backstage. Jumping to arrive on the beat. About 5 years after the creation of Lenos, Nijinsky became the choreographer of the ballet de Ida Rubinstein, or Ida Rubinstein, and Frederick Ashton joined the company. He was already a choreographer, but he knew he wanted to apprentice himself to one of the leading choreographers of the day. Nijinsky taught class every day, and Ashton said that it was fascinating that even when she was teaching basic steps like tendu, let alone more complicated things like grand jeté, she made you lean from the waist, tipping above the waist the whole time. You see throughout Lenos. It also is bending this way and that. See in these jumps, bend, bend, bend. English, the words here were always raise your voices. I can still hear it after 25 years. I first saw this ballet at Covent Garden in 1974. It was on the first programme of the Royal Ballet I ever saw. And tragically, there are no plans for the Royal Ballet to dance this for its centenary next year. It is being danced by Ballet West in Salt Lake City. It's a historically wonderfully conscious company. Why the Royal is not doing it, I don't know. See just there how sometimes Nijinsky is prepared to stage rhythms that are independent of the music as well as other rhythms that go with the music. She was doing every kind of musical experiment during the 1920s. Amazing image there. Everybody bent low as if almost hiding. There's that opening of the arms that we saw in the photograph of Beriosa. Look at these architectures of the group. Amazing. Look at this, everybody hands over their ears, treading their way into the front, this way and that. Jump, jump, pause, jump, jump, pause. I haven't mentioned Stravinsky's amazing orchestration, so sparse. Piano, chorus, percussion. He actually tried reorchestrating it several times before he reached this brilliant solution. And at the end you will see the imagery of the bells. Men, or all of them, raise their hands, pull, bell, chime. I wish I could remember what the words are saying here, but they are positive words, whereas Nijinsky is not giving us a sweet image here. Look, they're opening, the two mothers open the bedroom door. You see the bed, the pillows piled high. Pyramid reforms. But now as part of a much larger social architecture, with the bridesmaid now at the top of the pile. And the bridegroom's leading friend raises his hand like the prince at the end of Firebird, but now as part of a larger world. That gesture that we saw in the photograph with Anthony Darwin, taking forever to lift his hand. Amazing. Great to see it again. Let's go straight on into a ballet that Balanchine choreographed 11 years later, Serenade. It's famously the ballet that he choreographed on arrival in America, which he had been teaching his students for about 2.5 months, and suddenly in the middle of March he suddenly could feel that he was ready to make a new ballet. Choreography came fast. I think I've shown Serenade on previous occasions here, so I'm not going to show much of it here. All my emphasis here is a different emphasis of commonality, which is Balanchine stealing, shall we say, from Nijinsky, borrowing. We're going to see 2 Nijinsky-isms. Let's go. How unlike, look. How unlike and like Nijinsky. There, the shape of the arm is got here with stretched fingers, not fists. But that's a Nijinsky-type emphasis, which he makes into something much more romantic. He also has the muses in Apollo doing the same kind of meaning of these arms on other shapes. It's a fabulous ballet, Serenade, to me the most rewatchable of all ballets, and the whole of this first movement is a kaleidoscope, image after image, but look at the end, at back. 6 girls with their backs to us. Where have we seen it? Those men in the second scene of Les Noces. Look, look, look. Boom, back into that pile up of backbends. It's straight out of the men's scene in Les Noces. Thank you, Bronislava Nijinsky. You hardly notice it because the emphasis is on this soloist, Maria Caligari, but there they still are. Okay, let's stop there. Thank you. Now we're going to end with 3 dances, all I suppose by modern dance choreographers, though one of them has point work, sort of, from the last 30 years. I suppose I've seen all of them at their premieres. How embarrassing, but then I'm a very old person. The first is Mark Morris's version of the Nutcracker called The Hard Nut. And Mark Morris, if you know Joe Nacacella's wonderful book about him, is a choreographer who provides various versions of Utopia in his, or various Utopias in his choreography, not throughout, but sometimes. In the Nutcracker, the Hard Nut, he really presents at the beginning a real modern American nuclear family. They watch television, they've got a black maid, it's full of all kinds of social tensions that then burst apart. The snowflake scene is when we first see the world is truly changing out of recognition. And snowflakes are the wackiest snowflakes you ever saw. They have bare midriffs, they have hairdressers that I cannot explain. And this is the original production, which no longer quite happens the same way. That is, that half the dancers, male and female, dance on point, and the other half dance with bare feet. I believe now it's all bare feet, or at least shoes, but nobody's on point. The original men who had never danced on point in their career found it great fun to try, but because they weren't used to point work, they went through all of those things that girls go through when they first do point work. Their nails went black, some of them found toenails dropping out, all kinds of things. You don't repeat that every year. So it's fun to see this original production. This was filmed when Mark Morris was resident at the Théâtre Royal de la Monnaie in Brussels. Let's go. Little stubby tutus, black point shoes, nobody trying to show the beautiful arch of the foot. Clement Crisp, when he first saw this on film, was terribly upset because this is not pretty point work as he wanted to see. That's the point. I thought of this yesterday when Alice Oswald was reciting poetry. I forget what phrase she had about something like white substance that is not snow, and I thought, oh, we're going to see that tomorrow with Mark Morris's choreography. Here you are. I believe what they actually throw in their hands is powdered newsprint. But of course, if you want to see it as cocaine, you can. Whatever it is, it's fun, and it is the scene of transformation. And the amazing thrill which Mark Morris keeps varying throughout the scene is the timing of the explosions of these snowflakes. Normally we see in any nutcracker snow falling from above, but to have snow thrown by the dancers is such a wacky surprise. I wish we knew what Tchaikovsky was thinking of when he added singers to the Waltz of the Snowflakes. They don't appear anywhere else in the score. There's no words. Very feminine step, en boîte, done by men as well as women. And as you see, a black dancer at the center of it. So we are, shall we say, beyond race or beyond racial differentiation, and we're beyond gender. Though the hard nut is the story, a heterosexual story, of a boy and a girl finding love and achieving it, with the rest of the world helping them on. I'd love to know how they keep enough snow in their hands to keep on releasing it several times in each of their entries. As you can hear, the music is building to another crescendo, really up into a storm, a snowstorm. You really didn't think they'd got snow in their hands this time, but look! There is a theory that if you keep on watching choreography, you'll always find the perfect version of any one piece of music. I'm here to say that's rubbish. There are, I think, 3 at least versions of the Waltz and the Snowflakes, each of which is indispensable to your hearing of the music. This is one of them. Balanchine's is also sublime. but it's only the one by Alastair Macaulay that makes me hear what the voices might be about. Now we're past the storm. The music's taking us into peace. At the end, Drosselmeyer, the magician, sadly walks through this snowscape, as you will see. Strange touch of pathos at the end of this crazily happy scene. Wonderful. Now we're going to look, thanks to the Cunningham Trust, at the beginning and the end of Merce Cunningham's biped. Cunningham, as you probably all know, had a very long career, choreographing up to his last premiere on his 90th birthday, though he then revised it 2 months later, so in a way that was another premiere after the 90th birthday. This is the premiere that happened straight after his 80th birthday, I think 2 weeks later. And I remember being at the premiere in San Francisco, and Merce received vast ovations for this amazing work that he made, biped. Someone simply made a speech in his honor, and he was expected to reply. He simply said, "A month ago I went to visit my brother Jack in my hometown, Centralia, and Jack simply said to me, 'Merce, when are you going to make something that the public likes?'" And that was, Merce just left it hanging there. He had made many works that the public liked, but now he'd had a complete triumph. I think biped was loved just about wherever it went around the world. He had many phases of his choreography, but this comes from the final phase, more or less, when he was using a computer, and he would use computers different ways, but he was now very lame, so he would work out the legs one day on the computer, and then teach the legs to the dancers. He'd then teach the torso the next day, and then he'd teach the arms the next day. That means very complicated feats of coordination for the dancers, who loved the challenge of having to get these different requirements into them. And you'll see different kinds of arms that choreography really had not devised before. These are the first 5 solos that open biped. I think they alone are a cornucopia. And they show that biped is really all about always being in motion, even though there are pauses in the phrase. And then we'll see the 5 coming back to dance as a kind of ensemble. Let's go. The music is by Gavin Bryars. And the decor is connected to computer imagery featuring Cunningham biped choreography. This is the first solo, Cédric Andrieux. That way of holding the arms while the body moves, not unrelated to Nijinsky in a way, moving through the torso. But arms that aren't parallel, one arm, as you see, curved, the other stretched. Twists of the upper body, pauses, really a heroic quality, and a utopia of a kind. This is Jean Freebury, and we're really seeing another ballet here that gives us a unisex quality. There is male-female partnering in biped, but the difference between male and female is not emphasized. Cunningham, throughout most of his career, had made an issue of male-female equality in dance. It's wonderful lighting by Aaron Kopp, like suddenly making it like a chessboard that comes and goes. Here's Tom Cayley with the most staggeringly arched feet I ever saw on a man. It's interesting watching 7 different choreographers in succession because you see points of connection you hadn't anticipated. He just did the same kind of sideways jump, the jeté à la seconde that we saw in Bournonville. Cunningham did love Bournonville, so you never know, he may have been thinking of that. Banu Ogun. As you see, the choreography is multi-directional. You can face upstage on the diagonal, to the front, to the side. Cunningham would always say, wherever you are facing, that is front. Which is both a choreographic point, but also a spiritual one. And as you see, the decor allows the dancers just to vanish into darkness at the back. Here's the computer-generated imagery that Paul Kaiser and Shelley Ashkar devised, based on 2 of the Cunningham dances and phrases that Cunningham had choreographed for them. And here is Jeannie Steele, who was one of the 2 dancers on whom Cunningham devised that computer-generated imagery. She now teaches in London at the place. As I'm sure you know, Cunningham made dances independent of music. When I interviewed Jeannie Steele 2-3 years ago, she was talking about the inner musicality of Cunningham's choreography, and she said, my head was full of songs and sonatas as I danced. Cunningham wasn't asking perfect synchronicity of the 5, just wanted to see 5 dancing in harmony here. And you can see where they are doing slightly different things and then very different things. Must be among the most tonal music that was ever used for a Cunningham score. I wish, even though this film is full of magic, I wish you could feel the effect of this lighting when you're present in the theatre. I love these lifts, so simple. Okay, let's stop here, otherwise we won't be able to bring ourselves to stop. And we'll go to the conclusion of Biped. Really, Biped shows us a company of, I think, 15 maybe dancers, and the meaning crossing the stage every which way. Cunningham would, of course, never talk about meaning, but many people watching it feel that it's, I think some people it's about death, because, of course, that amazing effect of the exits, dark, 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 we all go into the dark, to quote 4 quartets. But I think it's more about transcendence, and of course that computer-generated imagery on the front of dancers taking off into space every which way. But at the end, everybody starts to return to the stage, and they are face front in a new kind of way, and they go down to the ground individually in new kinds of way, and then rise up. Let's look. As you see, the woman on the the right, I think she's Lise Boudreau, kneels. We've not really seen anybody go down to the ground until now. This work altogether is about 45, 46 minutes long. The man on the left, David Kulik, now in plie, will go down also to the floor. As you see at the back, people are still crossing side to side, but the people in the front are mainly facing to the front. Just that change of direction brings a wonderful finale sense. David Kulik, the man we just saw in close-up, now slowly falls over onto the side and lies there like a Henry Moore fallen warrior. But he will rise from that position. As you see, several of the dancers are kneeling, but the woman who was originally kneeling is now upright. So we are keeping moving on. More and more of the dancers facing front. And of course there is a religious sense that Cunningham had long since rebelled against the Catholicism of his upbringing. Wonderful work. Now let's go on to my last piece, which is 4 quartets. I'm very grateful to the Pam Tanowitz Company for letting us show this. I'm going to just show the beginning of, I think it's the 4th of the poems, T.S. Eliot. Is that Little Gidding? It is, yes. Here we are. We were talking yesterday about poetry and dance. Here, of course, we have some of the greatest 20th century poetry, T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets. It's set to music, and I can't remember the name of the woman Finnish choreographer. I think she was a brilliant composer, and I've seen an opera by her, and I apologize to her for forgetting her name. The decor is really 4 successive paintings, and here we're going to see the 4th by the American painter Bryce Marden, adapted on a big scale for the stage. And I should remember also the male-female duo who have done the costumes. But Little Gidding really begins with images of, well, what T.S. Eliot himself calls midwinter spring. The poetry and the music and the dance are all independent of each other, and the amazing feat here, which I think we sometimes touched on yesterday with Alice Oswald, is that the movement creates a stage world so that it seems that the words arise out of the choreography rather than the other way around. The words aren't an interpretation. You see 1 or 2 little points of connection, but really the words that the dance is giving us the stage climate, and then we will hear the words. I wish I could remember the name of the wonderful American actress who's reading it. So interesting to have a woman reading 4 quartets. So often it has been men who read this poetry. Let's go. When you're there on stage, it's played as a continuity. But this is the beginning of the 4th quartet.
Midwinter spring is its own season. Sempiternal, though sodden towards sundown, suspended in time between pole and tropic, when the short day is brightest with frost and fire, the brief sun flames the ice on pond and ditches in windless cold that is the heart's heat, reflecting in a watery mirror a glare that is blindness in the early afternoon, and glow more intense than blaze of branch or brazier stirs the dumb spirit. No wind, but Pentecostal fire in the dark time of the year, between melting and freezing, the soul's sap quivers.
As you see,
There is no
multi-directional.
earth smell or smell of living thing. This is the springtime, but not in time's covenant. Now the hedgerow is blanched for an hour with transitory blossom of snow, a bloom more sudden than that of summer, neither budding nor fading, not in the scheme of generation. Where is the summer? The unimaginable zero summer.
No gender distinctions.
If you came this way, taking the route you would be likely to take from the place you would be likely to come from, if you came this way in Maytime, you would find the hedges white again in May with voluptuary sweetness. It would be the same at the end of the journey if you came at night, like a broken king. If you came by day, not knowing what you came for, it would be the same when you leave the rough road and turn behind the pigsty to the dull facade and the tombstone. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured and is altered in fulfillment. There are other places which also are the world's end, some at the sea jaws, or over a dark lake, in a desert or a city. But this is the nearest in place and time, now and in England.
Amazing juxtaposition of stillness and motion there.
If you came this way, taking any route, starting from anywhere, at any time or at any season, it would always be the same. You would have to put off sense and notion. You are not here to verify, instruct yourself, or inform curiosity, or carry report. You are here to kneel where prayer has been valid. And prayer is more than an order of words, the conscious occupation of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. And what the dead had no speech for when living, they can tell you, being dead. The communication of the dead is tongued with fire beyond the language of the living. Here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere,
That fluttering
never
of the hands becomes a motif.
and always.
Penché arabesque with the fluttering of the hands. And the penché is another motif. The two are not always combined. tranché without flutter. I love the way the leg pulls down and through. And by the way, I love the way that the feet look just so beautiful throughout four quartets.
Ash on an old man's sleeve
I
is
want to
all the
show
ash
you
the
more,
burnt
but I'm
roses
afraid we're out of
leave.
time.
Dust in the air.
Some of you will have seen four quartets when it came to the Barbican in 2019. It was new the year before. I saw the world premiere in New York State, Bard College. It was thrilling to see it again at the Barbican. It's now finally been seen in New York City, I think last year. I was then in 2018, the critic of the New York Times. I was very proud to be able to say, I think this is the greatest work of dance theatre yet choreographed this century. And I'm very proud that I still think so too. Thank you very much for being with me, and I hope we've opened up just different ideas of what commonality in dance may be. Thank you.
Romanticism through classicism, through modernism, and romanticism in modernism, romanticism in classicism. I mean the other way around, you know.
I should have also pointed out, thinking of commonality, that of course Tanowitz is picking up a lot of Cunningham's vocabulary. One of the most obvious points about four quartets is that she's picking up his multi-directionality, the way that the dancers are facing every which way, not just front.
Oh yeah, yeah. But it's such a shame that Thomas isn't here today, because I was just thinking, having seen Commonalities the other day. Do you see any commonalities here, or any traditions going right through?
Well, we hope Thomas Page is watching on the camera, because this was for him. Good, thank you very much. Shall we end?
Charlie,
Sorry.
Yeah, it's very. Thank you. I guess it's like a very different. It's very interesting, watching this sort of work and the classical technique that's used, and how in my training and in the piece, it's not necessarily. It's not something that was necessarily focused on so much, but there is a commonality between the two. But it's interesting the way that it is sort of described to you, or the way in which you sort of organically create it in a studio space, and how even without with knowing sometimes, like you said, whether they knew or not knew, whether they knew or they didn't know about the movements in the past that it now reflects on in the work. So I think there are definitely elements that you can that does have this similarity, and the context is very different, but it is nice that it does have that relationship.
It's fascinating, isn't it? That, anyone? Is there somebody else want to respond to that?
I have a question that sort of comes out of that. So,
Gabriella.
yes, commonality was the idea that came from Thomas Page, but then you developed that into community and utopias as well. Is that right? Can I ask just how those ideas came out of that and through these works?
I think when I first thought of commonality, I straight away thought, actually of scenes, of course, that we haven't looked at today, but so often, both with ballet, where you're looking at the shades in Bayadère, we're straight away going into a perfect world. Of course, it's one person's perfect world. It is one person's dream, not everybody's perfection. And I was thinking of Mark Morris's L'Allegro, Penseroso, Moderato, which I think shows us one utopia after another, some in the Allegro outward style, some in the Penseroso thoughtful, melancholy style. So I just thought, okay, let's investigate all these possible different utopias. And in the case of Les Noces, what one could describe as dystopia. I think when I gave myself the title, I hadn't yet thought of Les Noces and dystopia, but because I've been thinking about Nijinsky this year, I suddenly thought, oh, I can't resist.
Yeah, I think the Nijinsky work was really interesting in that regard. Thank you.
That sounds perfect, actually. The dystopia that you're thinking, or does that mean that the no place of utopia becomes a place in dystopia?
Ooh.
Oh dear.
We're getting a bit logocentric here.
Never mind. I thought of another double that you're going for is the human and the non-human right through. That starts with Giselle.
Right. I mean, in a way, so much dance, or any dance that aspires towards forms of classicism, connects the human to the non-human. That is, you see somebody who's human who steps into a work, into a shape of perfect geometry. And that is something we see in ballet the whole time. That is, a real human being suddenly becomes a work of the ideal, even if only for the duration of that arabesque. And that tension is there throughout dancing, at least if it goes to any kind of classical rigor. I'm not just talking of ballet here, I'm talking of Martha Graham, I'm talking of Cunningham, all that kind of thing, yeah. Of course, there are many good and great kinds of dancing that don't ever go for that kind of geometric transcendence, but where that happens, it sets up straight away tensions of meaning, as you say, to do with the human and the non-human that are fascinating.
Anyone else? I think we can...
Let's... Susie Crowe.
I just wanted, I mean, from what I understand about what Thomas is interested in, he is interested in an idea of a utopia, of a sort of some kind of idealistic view of dance as a community and where it might go and how it might operate, and I think it's really interesting to look at these often rather utopian kind of visions of people dancing in harmony and things. I mean, I'm hoping that might be kind of helpful or inspirational or suggest ways in which that idea might be. This is something that Thomas is researching, I believe, on a very practical level, in terms of the reality of the world of dance at the moment. So I think it's rather intriguing to see these abstracted and poetic visions of utopia, and see how they might translate into the real world, really, and how we all operate in the dance world.
I think all the dances we've looked at today are good examples of what I feel is poetry in choreography, all of them. There is some great choreography that is prose, and I love that too, but it's interesting watching poetic qualities here. And it's very interesting, just thinking of Giselle versus Napoli, how say in Giselle, how what seems like utopia at the beginning, of course, is the opposite of utopia. Albrecht is going to be danced to death and would die were it not for 4 o'clock. So what seems a beautiful world of femininity is actually morbid. Hey-ho, on that note, let us part. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Alastair, for giving us such a cornucopia of utopia. Okay.
Thank you to Joseph.
Let's go and have a cup of tea.